So do you think that that's, are we seeing, with what we're going through in the venture marketplace, and I'll throw the angel marketplace in here too, are we preparing for another growth stage, or are we preparing for another meltdown? What do you think?
All right. Well, there's two components to that. So there's the venture capitalists, and then the people who invest in the funds that venture capitalists manage. So, they're interrelated, I guess, right? So VC can't invest money if it hasn't raised money. And so what's happening on the VC fundraising side is that the amount of money that VCs are able to raise has dropped precipitously to levels that you haven't seen since in the early 95 or something like that. And that to some extent kind of sets the tone, I think, for how people are thinking in terms of how big funds they are raising, how much money they're raising, how much money they're going to put to work. There's also, so that's one element, the way people are thinking about stuff. So I think that's kind of reduced the check sizes and increased the thoughtfulness, I think, a little bit out there, because there's a little more scrutiny on the asset class, because people are saying, hey, VC hasn't made the kinds of returns that it should have, or people expected. But on the other end, there's the whole, that macroeconomic outlook definitely impacts us when we're thinking about companies that are in the revenue phase. So if we're talking about investments that we're going to spend the next year or so in development, it's actually a really good time, and we're pretty aggressive because there's plenty of labor, it's cheaper, a lot of rent, it's cheaper. It's just all the ingredients that you need to start a company it's actually a good time if you're not looking for customers today. And if you're which is the case in some types of investments where you're really building something for at least the first year or so. You might have some beta customers, but you can find those. But I think, yes, there's definitely still caution. I don't think anyone thinks that we're out of the woods yet. I don't think anyone's investing aggressively that way in markets or in investments that rely on the kind of general uptake of spending, business spending.
Well, the stock market leads the economy, while investment banking tends to lag.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lag. There's also, the only ties that we have as venture capitalists to public markets are twofold. One is that our companies eventually sell to a business that sells to a consumer or to a consumer directly, and so if that's slow, our revenue ramp is slow, unless we're part of a market that's growing really big. So there's something like e-commerce and a few other things that continue to actually grow net because there's traditional businesses that are shrinking and they're just getting share. So it's just a slower growth, but it's still growth. Or there's some counter-cyclical investments also that exist out there that benefit from downturns. But I would say, we're tied to the macroeconomics in terms of how companies do, and then the second way we're tied is the IPO and M&A market. And so if we don't feel that valuations, if we feel valuations are going up right now, so a lot of people might be pushing to sell, for instance, if they think that this is a blip and it might go down again next year, because the comparables are higher. So that the equivalent company in the public markets or something close sells, you get $10 per subscriber instead of $3 per subscriber. You want to sell now. Some people are trying to take advantage of a little window that's showing up in the IPO market, so it's really small. So some people are pushing that, but I don't think anyone knows. People don't know if it's a V or a W. Everyone's trying to figure that out.
So Neil, I'm going to take your question and put a slightly different spin on it and pass this to Brian. So Brian, I've started a business as a Biz Spark partner. And I've gone out and I've built something, and I eventually want to deploy it in a fairly wide footprint. But right now, I'm just kind of the garage model, as you talked about. Mm-hmm. I'm in my garage, and I'm thinking about using Azure, but I don't understand the Azure ecosystem. If all of a sudden the economy gets great, my little business starts growing like a weed, what kind of cycle do you go through Biz Spark and Azure to take, a cloud app from basically, there in your garage up broader deploy?
Yeah, I think certainly in the cloud space, most startups are looking, right? There's some folks out there that are in that space today. We certainly announced our space with Windows Azure. But I think to your question is, one, within Biz Spark, certainly there will be some announcements that I can't actually say now that will benefit startups certainly looking to go to the cloud. And many people go to the cloud obviously because it's going to be cheaper than going out and buying a bunch of servers, throwing them in your garage. Why everybody wants to put servers in their garage, I don't know. But the cloud is a scalable platform, and it's a cheaper way to scale. So that your example is a perfect one. I could always go to GoDaddy and pay the $9 to get hosting, and I get it unlimited a month, and it's great. My website's doing awesome. And then the economy comes back. That product that I designed and I built, now all of a sudden is getting 1 million hits a day. That little subscription with GoDaddy is not going to sustain that. Windows Azure, as well as other cloud platforms, are designed to take advantage of that scale and to go at that scale at a price point that the startup decides, that the person decides, that I may be okay with a certain amount of latency or kind of amount of time that it takes to serve my page, but I'm only paying for that, right? So I think those platforms are going to be, which is good for Microsoft that we got into that space. There's an obvious reason why we got into that space. I think that is the future of where most technology will go, and startups know that as well. And we're positioned in a place right now, especially for Biz Spark companies, because they're building on typically .NET, our language, our development language. Windows Azure is a natural transition. So we're there to help scale for the startup. And we're there to help scale at a price point that a startup can absorb, rather than just being all of a sudden I get a check from whomever your hoster of choice is that month and be like, oh yeah, you exceeded your 5 gigabytes of bandwidth by 1 terabyte, right? And I got a $700,000 check. So I think that the cloud space is certainly one that's interesting to startups, and one that if you are a startup and you're not thinking about, it's certainly something you probably should be, just from a price point as well as a technology point.